So I'm the first intersex person to be appointed in the statutory authority in the independent India. So we worked nearly 7+ years to bring this law in the upper house and the lower house of the parliament, and the president signed it, and the Protection of Rights of Transgender Persons Act 2019 was passed, and a lot of political parties were against it. And when I mean I'm an intersex person, in our constitution, we have this word, sex. We interchangeably use it. The word sex is different from gender. The word sex and gender is different from sexual orientation and sex characteristics. Sex is very specific to Homo sapiens. Sex is very specific to all the species in the world, whereas gender is very specific to Homo sapiens. And when I mean intersex, when an infant is born, you identify the infant with the reproductive system. When the infant have the male-like reproductive system, or the stereotypically male-like reproductive system, you call it as male. When the infant is having that stereotypically female-like reproductive system, you call it as female. When the infant is born with ambiguous genitals, or with the very kind of appearance with you can't easily classify them to fit in with male or female structure, then you call them as infants born with, DSD. So now the term we use is intersex. Differences in sex development was the earlier term, but then in the WHO, a lot of us activists worked on the nomenclature and changed it to intersex. So first of all, the word sex, gender, and sexual orientation and sex characteristics need to be introspected. The most important thing is that homogenizing certain rights and law as universal itself is a Western approach. What is human rights for the West is not human rights for the global South. And masculinity, femininity, all this are like unscientific. There was a Brahminess which was running on the stage. It was a kind of, it has certain venom in it. There are certain types of snakes and, vertebrates, as well as these types of snakes don't have male species with them. They only have female. We call it as parthenogenesis, even in Christianity or in many religions. Women giving birth to certain divine people are considered as parthenogenesis or parthenogenic birth. The most important thing is that gender roles are different from sex identity, and no meta-era can change the basics of sex characteristics. Male, female, intersex, that's what the infants are born or assigned or identified with. When it comes to gender role, that is completely different. That is man, women, transgender people, and then we have 58+ gender identities. Facebook have options for all that. I wrote a book on it in Tamil language, which is part of curriculum in different universities in Tamil Nadu. The most important thing is that God is, God is not Shettiar, Kannadika, Tamilian. If God is beyond all expandable list of identities, God is also beyond gender or sex. We personify gods, we give attributions to them. So the most important thing, when I designed the curriculum for the National Council for Churches in India, especially for the Serampore University people, for the Protestant Church, for inclusion and diversity, the very first thing I told them is that if you believe Christ is not a, Indian or African or, beyond all these identities, then Christ is not a male or female too. So the most important thing is that we label everything, we bind everything, towards our understanding. And so the point I'm trying to convey here is that, first of all, the word sex need to be understood in a broader manner, because when ma'am was mentioning the word gender, she simultaneously used the word male and female, which is wrong. Male and female is a sex identity. Man and woman is a gender identity. And all this feminism and philosophies comes as part of our gender role, but not as part of the biological sex itself, because in the diverse, species in the world, in a lot of species, they don't know whether they are female and all that, but in those species, female play a lead role. For example, elephant herds. We can give examples like that. So coming to the meta-era, these technology need to assist us. And we have this technology, and how it is going to help us to ease the trauma, pain, struggle, the society goes through. Most of the 14-year-old children, when we run out of our home because our parents don't accept us, we need to, we join in this hijra jamaat and gharanas and havelis, which is a transgender hijra jamaat. We call it as jamaat or gharanas or havelis or dayars. We need to pay at least 2 to 3 lakh rupees by begging to our transgender gurus. The moment we pay it, they will allow us for the surgeries, and once the surgeries are done, it will take us 1 year for the pain and the wounds to get healed. Once after this year, after the surgery is done, they domesticate us into rape and prostitution and begging. That's why majority, 98% of my community members are on the road, begging and doing prostitution. This law is the first law. The Protection of Rights of Transgender Persons Act 2019 is the first law to question it. Congress was against passing it. Communists were against passing it. Even certain European and American civil societies funded a lot of money to stop this law. With 7 years struggle, this law was passed and the statutory body was created, and I'm sitting on that. So the most important thing is, what is meta-era, how it is helping us? In sports only, certain, female athletes need to undergo sex verification test earlier. Even some male athletes underwent, but then not in a humiliating way like these female athletes. These female athletes, especially Shanti Soundararajan from Tamil Nadu, a Dalit Hindu athlete from Tamil Nadu, was kept naked for more than 7 hours in Doha in 2006 Asian Games because they felt she is less women. And she came back. At the time, Congress government didn't do anything. 2014, the regime changed, and then a lot of things happened. The same problem came to Tudi Chand. And the present government sponsored the Tudi Chand's case in Court of Arbitration for Sports. We were assisting that from behind the scene. How many of you know, because of the present government, Rio Olympics became the first Olympics which took place without sex verification test? Female athletes. The Court of Arbitration for Sports said, who gave you the authority to decide or define who is women and what is women? It is their legs which is running on the ground. Do you have enough evidence to show that because of the excess of testosterone they produce in their body, it improves their, sports activity or whatever it is? So coming to the point that technology need to assist us to be more inclusive. And the meta-era need to help us to be more inclusive, not divide us with further identities and then in dharmic perspective, in our Indic or indigenous or Hindu perspective, we create identities to empower people, not to divide and exploit them. These days, activisms are more into exploiting an identity. Though those type of activism are very destructive than constructive. I am one of the petitioner in the Delhi High Court with Abhijit Iyer Mitra vs. the union government to recognize same-sex marriages under the Hindu marriage law. The case is, adjourned to August, I think. Under Hindu marriage law, because even under the Special Marriages Act, if a person like me is going to marry the person whom I love or like, need to convert the religion to inherit the property, or, there are a lot of complications. So that's why under the Hindu marriage law, because there are different types of Hindu marriages, Paichacha, Daivata, Gantharva, like that, different, and not all Hindu marriages are following Shatapatha Brahmanas, things. So there are also marriages within the Hindu or indigenous systems which don't follow the mainstream scriptures or, certain smritis. Smritis keep on changing in the Hinduism, but Shrutis don't. But we make sure whatever smritis are changing, it is based on the Shruti, basically. So coming to the point that the very first thing is that our doctors don't know the difference between sex, gender, and sexual orientation, and gender identity, and gender expression. We need to have a centralized mechanism to monitor the narratives on sex, gender, and sexual orientation, and the issues around SOGSE. We don't want to use the word LGBT because it is quite American, and it is erasing the other diverse indigenous identities, because the word LGBT is not accommodating Hijira, Jogappa, Mangalamukhi, Kinnar, Aravani, Nupi Manbi, or further identities. When Alan Turing was compelled to commit suicide because they identified him as a homosexual man, without Alan Turing, the World War II must have not ended. When he was compelled to commit suicide, a lot of gay, lesbian, and transgender people fled from UK. They came to India. They went to Hollywood Vedanta Society, where, in the Sharda Devi temple, they took refuge. And when people came to India, I was telling the former Tibet Prime Minister that there is this person called Lobsang Jivaka who was assigned as female at birth. She's the world first trans man who laid down the medical protocols. She was a medical doctor working for the British Army, then fled to India. And she was 15 years elder to Dalai Lama. And she's the first trans man to be ordained as a Buddhist monk in the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition. She is the first European to be ordained under the Vajrayana Buddhism, but also a trans man. So these Buddhist monks in Ladakh didn't say, oh, she's a woman, she's a man, she's a transgender person. You have the yearning, that's what Hinduism is. You have the yearning, go beyond identities. Your identities must uplift you. Go beyond identities and attain that. So in our indigenous and Indic traditions or Hinduism, who worship the selfless ancestors as God, or God as mother, or nature as God, we never restricted the enlightenment or the moksha part to women alone, to men alone. We have transgender priests in Tamil Nadu. We have gender-specific sacred spaces for these people. So I extensively wrote about it. And I hope the meta-era will be inclusive when we broaden our understanding towards a certain subject, because I'm speaking in English, which is a language limited, English have a lot of limitations. So I believe, let we first define each and every term what is coming out of our mouth, and let me not just think in English, because we have thousands of languages in India. And that meta-era should not, support only English-speaking, privileged, upper class or like certain community people. It should reach every village. That's what Digital India is doing. And thank you so much for the opportunity.